Okay, so it's that time of week again, and today we're discussing Robert Harris' Fatherland. And now the tagline on here, "What if Hitler had won?" is somewhat misleading, because this isn't necessarily a book about what would have happened if Hitler had won the Second World War. That's just the backdrop for the book. The book is set in an alternate timeline, an alternate history, in which Hitler and Germany won the Second World War, and the Third Reich Germany won the Second World War. And as such, the Nazis have taken over large parts of Europe and Russia and have become a German empire, if you will. The Berlin, in which this book is predominantly set, is based heavily on Albert Speer's design for what he wanted to put in Berlin after the Second World War, after the German victories. So if you know your history of the Third Reich, history of Germany, you'll know who Albert Speer was. He was the architect expert that Hitler referred to. Hitler spoke to quite a lot about this architectural design, New Berlin, that he wanted to create. And this is basically where it's set, and it's set in 1964. So it's just the right amount of time away from the Second World War for it to be close to modern day, but also close enough to the Second World War that most of the main Nazis are still alive. Himmler's dead. He died in the 50s in a plane crash or plane explosion, and Goering died of an undisclosed illness. Heydrich is still alive, interestingly, even though he was assassinated in 1942. In this history of events, in this alternate history, he survived that attempt. Hitler's still alive at 75. You've got Goebbels still alive, etc., etc. So loads of people are still alive. In fact, if you read the author's notes at the back, many of the characters in this book are real historical people who had real stories to tell and actually were involved in Third Reich Germany. And it tells you what happened to them in reality at the end of the book. But this follows a detective in the Kripo, which is the German criminal police. They've got 3 levels of police: the regular police who give out the parking tickets, etc., the Kripo, which deals with the murder, the arson, the kidnapping, etc., and then right at the top of the pecking order is the Gestapo, which is obviously political crime. And so it follows a Kripo detective who is called out to investigate a body, and he investigates a body and he starts digging into what might happen to this body, to this man, and slowly but surely he starts to unravel a conspiracy that goes almost right to the top of the Nazi hierarchy. And it's very, very interesting, because if you read through this, you can tell the Orwell influence. You can pick it up as you read along. You can tell that Harris was inspired by Orwell, particularly 1984, as he goes on, with the whole totalitarian, complete control of your life type thing, thought crime type thing. Obviously, that doesn't explicitly rip off Orwellian language, but the atmosphere is there. Now, I'm not sure if that's just because they're about similar things, or it's that was the influence actually showing. Also, you can tell the Hemingway influence, particularly For Whom the Bell Tolls. That's quite prevalent in the story. And as you read through it, you really get a connection with Xavier March, who is the main character. You really feel from the start, he's not a perfect man. He's not this brilliant hero who's handsome and dashing, and he's described as a middle-aged man who's got a bit of a drinking problem, from what I could gather, smokes quite heavily, he's divorced, he hasn't got a perfect life, etc., etc. His son despises him. He's seen as largely a social outcast, or apolitical, which is the term that's used, asocial, sorry, which is the term that's used in the book to describe him, which is he doesn't get involved in any of the party activities, doesn't join any of the groups, etc., etc. So people, they're quite suspicious of him. It's heavily referred that there's actually files on him at the Gestapo, and they're keeping an eye on him a few times in this book. So you actually develop quite a strong emotional bond to this character, and you want him to do well, which I think is something that every writer needs to do. They need to make you feel connected to their main character. And of course, he is typically a rebel in a system of totalitarianism, because you can't really write a book about a totalitarian system and not have the protagonist be somewhat of a rebel. You can't have it. You couldn't have written this book and had the detective be a loyal fucking Nazi, a proper outright Nazi who holds all their core values, because it just wouldn't it wouldn't work. The reader wouldn't want their protagonist to do well. At least none of the sane readers would have done. Nobody who has any decent values would have wanted that character to do well. But because this guy is a rebel, he's a bit of a runaway, you want him to succeed and you want him to do well. And as he starts digging around and investigating clues, and we really want to know what's coming next, what the next revelation is going to be. And there's revelations regularly throughout the book, and it's enough to keep you interested. It's enough to keep you in there and keep you turning the pages. And also what keeps you hooked in is the character development. Now it spends the first chapter or two details the investigation of the body and the discovery of the body, etc. And then he spends quite a few chapters developing the character of March and fleshing him out and making you feel an emotional connection with him. It details the relationship with his son, and there is a scene with his son on a bus tour bus going around Berlin, which is fantastically used by Robert Harris to detail the Berlin that he set this book in. It is used perfectly to actually encapsulate and detail the updated version of Berlin that he wants you to imagine this book is set in. So that's quite cleverly done. There's also a scene in a restaurant which is quite cleverly used to explain US-German tension, political tension and political atmosphere at the time, which is quite clever as well. It's quite a clever writer when he uses scenes and uses them to set things up and make you feel certain things. So it's very quite cleverly done in that respect. And as I say, it's one of these books that you keep turning the pages. You want to know what the next revelation is. You want to know what's coming next. You want to know enough of the chapters here leave you on cliffhangers to make you want to carry on to the next chapter. And that, I think, is very necessary in a detective thriller novel. Any of them, not just of this type of branch. Now it's very interesting because this reverses the usual murder mystery algorithm. Normally, obviously, in a murder mystery, right, you get a body, you get a crime, the entire novel is about the detective investigating a crime, figuring out who done it, and then going to arrest the murderer, right? Well, this book actually ends up being, because it's set in Nazi Germany and there's a conspiracy, as I said, that goes right to the top. I won't ruin too much for you guys, but this one starts out with a body and a crime and a murder, and the detective goes to find the murderer, and it ends up the murderer arresting the detective. So it flips it on its head, and that's quite an interesting take. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Go ahead and pick it up if you haven't read it. Give it a read through. It doesn't take that much commitment to read it. It's quite a relaxing read. Robert Harris, Fatherland. I'll see you next time.